Thank you for inviting me, and I'm very happy to be here. And Paco is right. I'd like it to be a conversation, because what I hate most is people that just come and say, this is what I did all my life, and this is what I have, and this is etc. And the only thing I can share with you is not what has happened, but is understanding the process of how we produce today, or how we direct, or how films are done today. We can start thinking about how everything is changing, and how. And I also teach in Montpellier, and the two things I tell my students are, we need to know, at the end of this year, we need to know two things. Not how to do a financial plan or how to do a budget, but what is changing, and in which, to understand the environment in which you're going to work. And the second aspect is, what are you bringing to this environment? To know more about who you are, each of you, where you are, and knowing what's outside, why do you want to do all this, and what are you bringing that belongs only to you and that you can start working on. So I think if we can have a conversation of what it is to be a producer today, or what it is to work in this environment today, it will be more interesting for you and for me, because I don't know everything, than to have just a kind of big lecture about 30 years of a production company and all that we did that is great and everything. So to start off with, I will show you I did a small trailer of 7 minutes, just so that you know one or two you see one or two images from films that I did in recent years. I don't redo it a lot, so some of the films, might be a bit dated, but it will give you at least images to start to discuss. So, as you see, each film is very different, and each film has its own story, and it's so there's no idea in what we'll try to speak about, trying to give one idea of what is a producer, or one, but to put the discussion at the right place. If we look at the the general idea, we have two kinds of production. One is, let's say, producing, the offer producing, or the demand producing. In, let's say, France and here and some other countries, there are independent producers which work on what they want to bring to the market. So, and so they offer to the market, as publishers, what they want to work on. In the Anglo-Saxon market, you have much more of a market which is a demand market, which is a market where everything each channel has a very strong editorial line and looks for producers capable of producing specific thing for this editorial line. Producers for Discovery Channel, for Arts Entertainment, so it's another kind of production, and it's another kind of approach to production. It doesn't mean that inside a production company some people don't do both, but it means it's not the same relation to directors, it's not the same relation to copyright, it's not the same relation to rights, it's not the same relation to work, to creation. And so this is a first big distinction. I have mainly worked in the category of offer, and not too much in the market of demand. I would like to maybe start by asking some of you, if some of you want to start talking about what they think a producer is. What is for them today the definition of what is their idea of what a producer is? There's one thing that you haven't talked about at all, which is that a producer to work is also an entrepreneur. He needs a tool. And each tool is different according to the producer, but without this tool, he can't work. Which means that you can find producers in different areas, artistically, and we can develop what kind of producer. Then I'll have to talk about myself at one moment or another. I am artistically, financially, and producers work very differently according to the kind of tool that they are, and that's another place where they work. As the founder, director, organizer, manager of a company, which is another work, another kind of work, which has another kind of implication. And also, he or she can be involved in collective action, which is how does the producer work on his environment, and how does he act on his environment. Inside all these, let's say, great sections you have, and then you have some producers, but I will not talk too much about that, which also do what you say, the organizing work, which is from budget to permits to etc. But for me, this is, let's say, they do it because they have to do it, or they want to work that way. But it's the producer I will talk about does not work like has some other people, production managers or production assistants, to do this work on the films. The producer in itself is the one that does all the other works, and is implicated in all these different elements. So if we start just taking all these elements, then I will be more specific and a bit more personal. Having projects. First thing for a producer is, what is he going to work on? He's not. If he's not the director, if he's not the author, you have producers which are authors, but I'm not, for example. I work on projects that come to me. I work like a publisher. Having people proposing to me films from very different ways of doing that. So, and very different films. What you've seen there are documentary, fiction, animation. This is one thing which has been behind the work that we've done at Film d'ici is to decide to be on not to choose an area of work, to go and do the work according to the project that we wanted to do. And we wanted to do television and cinema, new media. We wanted to do documentary, fiction, animation. So we wanted, without it being a strategy, even if we started very much in documentary, we have moved into all the areas of production. We haven't done very commercial movies because it's a know-how that also we don't have in-house. So there are things that we haven't done, but we've been, and in television we've gone from very experimental to prime time, in cinema also. So, but these projects have all the common. We can discuss about what is common about all this, and the question is, for example, and a question that I address to you. What do you need as future producers or as directors responding to what people want? What do you need to find in a project? I was trying to bring you to, I need the projects, whatever the way they're written. Sometimes they're 100 pages, sometimes they're 2 pages, sometimes they're images and text, sometimes only text, etc. I need to answer 3 questions, always, all the time. It's not a trick, it's just, you'll see that it's very obvious questions. What is it talking about? Why does the person that's doing it wants to do this film, wants to talk about it? And how, what tool is he using? What kind of a narrative approach he's using to achieve what he's promised with subject and with the first question and the second question. Whatever way it's written, if I don't have the answer to these 3 questions, I cannot talk about I cannot start talking about the project. Does it seem okay to you, these 3 questions? I'll just stop on the question of passion, which I call chain of desire. For me, it's a very, whatever the way it goes around, it's a very simple question. There's somebody who wants to do something, who has a desire, a profound desire, if it's to do something, which is communicating it to me, and if he doesn't communicate it to me I can't work, because this is exactly what I'm trying to sell to people. What I have to sell is the desire. Somebody has to make it, and that has been transmitted to me. So this chain of desire is the base of production. If that doesn't happen, this is why you can never normalize the way things happen, because there are people from whom their desire comes from reading. There are people with desire comes from seeing the previous films. There are people where desire comes from meeting the person. So you never can just have a lesson about how it works to choose a project, for example. A lot of people look at me like I'm crazy, because when I meet a director, I don't want to see the previous films. I only see it after, once I've done something with him, because him or her, because it's not going to be. That's not what's going to trigger why I want to do this film. I just want to get into an unexplored country, which is the desire of this director, the person, the way we meet, the way we discuss, the way something happens where I want to make this film. And then later I will look at the films. But I'm not doing the film because I have seen something previously and I want to redo it, or I want to pursue something. Sometimes it happens. It's, again, everything I will say is never a definitive law. It's just the way some people have access to desire and some other people have not. But this is structuring producers working on this, which is on the transmission of desire, which is very different than producers responding to a demand from a TV channel. I'll take some very opposite example. On Arif Olman coming in my office one day, because Avi Mograbi, other director with whom I work, had told him, you should go and see, he was looking for a producer in France, you should go and see Serge. He comes in, shows me a 3-minute trailer, or 5-minute trailer, even less, on Vals with Bashir, which rings a bell in the way he's talking to me about it, which rings a bell also to some other interests that I have, about reading graphic novel and thinking that graphic novel is the place where documentary is taking a new trend at that moment. It's very strong. This has been the first animation documentary, but it comes from this graphic novel world. And so all this creates a strong desire to work with him, even though there was no market, even though until the film was completed, he was going to lose his house, and there was about 800,000 euro out, which was not financed and which was only came after the selection in Cannes, so when the film was completed. So that is desire. When History Channel in the States calls the producers they're working with, saying, look, our marketing department said we need this year to target women from 30 to 50 years old for this slot, with this kind of revenues and with this kind of interest. So you have to propose to us projects that are addressed to them. And then the next year calls and says, no, finally, we've changed our mind. We want men from 40 to 60 years old with high revenues, etc. You're not at all working as a producer in the same environment. And I'm taking two really extreme work, but the two exist. And the two have a market. On the artistic side, projects come from very different, whatever, fiction, documentary, or animation, or new media, come from in very different ways. Some come through mail, some come through post, some come through people I know, some come from other directors, which bring you to other directors, which bring you to other directors. But every time, work starts by asking myself, what do I understand of this project? Do I understand what it's really talking about? Do I understand why he or she wants to make it? And do I understand if it's the way they want to make it? And are all the answers to these questions raising a desire for me to make it, which makes to think that it has to be made, and to try to find a way to then come to second phase, which is how to do it. On the development process, on the working with directors process, on the choosing of projects process, do you have some questions? Because there are many difficulties. I will leave the financial difficulties for later, and take the artistic difficulties. Creation is only a small part of what you see in the visual world. Everybody talks about creation, but in reality, creation is very, very a minority part of television, a minority part of internet, and a minority part of cinema also. The rest is know-how. So we have to ask ourselves, what is creation? For me, creation, I still stay on a definition which is a bit like every definition is interesting but not that interesting. Is somebody that sees something that others don't see, and that finds the way of bringing it to us. So if you work on this, if you look for this means that when you start working with somebody, with the director, you have to know if you're entering in a creation process or creative process or in a know-how process. And knowing that it's never one or the other completely. They can be a lot of know-how and a bit of creation. A lot of creation and a bit of know-how is less the reality of our work. But when you discover that you can, because sometimes you're wrong. You thought there was something. Sometimes you work for a month with somebody that doesn't manage to write or can't really clear his idea, etc. And you decide to go forward and to continue, even though because you find ways of telling yourself that sometimes there are people that invent while doing, or there are people that invent while that don't know how to write. So you don't have your answers before going. And I'm going to take some specific example. I've been in both directions. I'm working now with a director. It's a first-time director. He comes from theater. He does his first film, and he wrote a good project. He wrote a very good project, but he has no real experience of filmmaking. And it's been months that the editing is not very good. It's very flat, actually, and I've sold him to the channel as one of the great talents, upcoming talents, and I'm still convinced that he is. But the response, what he's done for the moment, is not very good, till a few days ago. But yet, something made me. I was convinced with him that it's because the system of making films doesn't work for somebody like that, the way we organize it, in the sense that he's always invented in doing. If he's not, he can't think things before doing them. In theater, for example, he works on documentary theater. So he spends 2 years with people and takes what they say and then rewrites it, and then you see that his play is changing while he's working. In cinema, it's very hard to do that because of the cost of going to shoot. The film is in Morocco. We can't send him every week to do something. But by changing the way of doing the film and giving him that possibility, the last edit that I saw a few years ago is becoming great. So there's something happening in the process where I was not wrong. He has talent, and it's going to be a great film. But there are moments where I had this doubt about would he or she would really be able to do, and then editing after editing, there is nothing. Not only there is nothing, but there is not the perception there is nothing. There is not the because there are people that there is nothing, but they know that there is nothing. So if they know that there is nothing, it's fine. You know that they will, at one moment or another, find a way of passing from nothing to something. But if they're nothing and they have, and you're not, you disagree on this nothing, then you're in trouble. You're really in trouble. And the second difficulty is when somebody does exactly what you say. Then you're finished because you're not the director. The worst thing for me is to go in an editing room, to say what I think about the film, to come back a week later and to see exactly what I've said, done. Because that means that there is something going wrong in the process. And that's something going wrong in the process, because if I was a director and if I was directing the film, then I would direct the film. I would not be in the production. The idea of having two people is, it's not because you say that at this moment there's something going wrong in the film, that it's really at this moment. The best example, and very simple example, is Philibert, when I was saying it's too long there, and I would come back, and it was great, and I was saying, what did you do? And he said, I made it longer. And that's what we're talking about. I mean, we're talking about people that know what they're doing and are capable of understanding that there is a problem by what you say, but not taking you as the solution to the problem. And so this was another, and it happened to be a few times, and I know I'm in danger. So I know that I'm passing from producing a film to saving a film, because that's also the function of a producer. Because one thing we haven't said about a producer, that he's responsible for delivery. And so whatever happens in the story of a film, he's responsible for delivery. So he can be involved artistically to compensate, without being a director, problems that can be on a film. And there are many problems. So if I come back to your questions, artistically is to realize that the director, in fact, has no idea of the film that he wants to do. Because I rely on the fact that somebody knows. I don't know. On the contrary of what has been said, I don't remember by who, I don't have an idea of what the film will be at the end. And I don't want to have an idea of what the film was going to be at the end. And the more I am surprised by what I see, the more I can feel the strength of the directing. If I know what I'm going to have at the end, means that something's going wrong. We're just building a product, but we are there, I can have the intuition of something, but never the final picture. But somebody has to have it one moment. Doesn't mean that he has to have it or she has to have it from the beginning, but as the film goes on, if the director doesn't know where he or she is going, then who is? And if nobody knows, what are we doing? What are we working on? How can we just make the right decisions? We can't. So this is my difficulty in this field. The answer for me, and I don't consider myself as a producer of animation movies. I do animation movie. I'm just starting one, but I am not. There are producers that are very interested in how things are made. I don't care. It's I work on too many things to be really interested in the techniques, for example. So I know that it's 2D and not 3D. I have some people that know very well what they're doing, but I'm interested in why we're doing animation. My main concern in animation film is, why are we doing this film in animation instead of doing it in fiction or another thing? Why have we chosen to do it in animation? If I can't answer to that question, I can't do my work. Then, in the process, actually, it's a very, let's say, not frustrating process, but in a certain sense, yes. In the sense that when you produce animation, you have in mind that every minute of animation produced costs a lot of money. So the way it's done secures the fact that when you enter to see the real thing, all the decisions have been made up front. So the margin that you have to, for example, what I love on a documentary project is working on the edit. working on the edit is a real job where you can really change things. On an animation project, it's really working on the script and working on the animatic, because after that, you can't do anything. You can just make sure that the process is going smoothly to the end. So it's another kind of work where you're not really working on the actual images. You're working on a kind of complicated process where you have to take a line, and you have to take an image that you know and try to reconstruct all of this, and measure the rhythm of a film with just a black and white line, and some sound process which is not the definitive sound, etc. So it's strange. I love the results. I love the kind of animation films we're working on. I really like the people, that the way it's done, in the sense that it's another thing that I want to maybe have time to talk with you, that it's really collaborative work doing an animation film, and I really think that it's something we have to think more and more about in terms even of the position of the director in a film. But it's less of the kind of pleasure or joy that you can have when you see something happening on a documentary film. I saw 30 minutes of this film I talked to you about yesterday in the train, of this film where for a month nothing was happening, and I was asking myself how we would, of this theater director doing his first film, and then he started. He didn't want to put voiceover, and he didn't know, and I knew that he had to do more than just the travel to Morocco. He had to bring back elements. It's a film that starts from a play that he did on the death of his mother that he filmed before, and then he did a marvelous play which was shown in Avignon with the real material that he had taken during all that time. And then he inherits a field in Morocco of pavot, I don't know, of drug. I mean, how do you say, opio, in Morocco. And his uncle says you have to come with a special car, which is the Air-12, because they're the only one that go up there. So he leaves from France and does all this travel to Morocco. And during all this travel, there's the recalls all that he lived with his mother during the last moments of her life. And the film, he filmed very well the trip to Morocco, but there was nothing of the density of the relation. And he didn't want to talk. He didn't want to put a voiceover. And then during January, beginning of January, he decided, because he has a small girl, he decided to start filming her and addressing to her in front of just a map of the trip, and with a little car, model car of the Air-12, and he speaks to her. He explains who her grandmother was and what happened and during the last moments, etc. All the things that he said in the play, but he redoes the play to his small 3-year-old, 2-year-old daughter, and it works perfectly, and it brings the density in the first part of the film that we were lacking. That was not in the script. It was not in the project. He's invented that early January, and he will invent other things afterwards. But something is happening. So that I can't do on an animation film. If when I see the edit in the animation film, it doesn't work, it doesn't work. When we're talking about production in general, I produce 20 to 30 films a year. Some go to festival of wine films, and some go to the Cannes Film Festival, and some go to the Mediterranean Film Festival, and some go to documentary film festival. So so I all the time this world of image is organized around subject or directors or special approaches or whatever. So if you ask me which festival is looking for what, then I can discuss with you. But I can't answer to the question what festivals are looking for. Can is in a way simple and not simple. Can is looking for the best of, that's the official is the best of world cinema, but but of a certain world cinema, which has to be pretty, let's say, author world cinema. But in the same time, what happens underneath also is a lot of there are a lot of financial stakes, and there are a lot of image stakes. So if you look at it, for example, an official selection, you can't say it's the best films of the year. It's the crossing between the best films of the year, relation to directors, relation to distribution companies, wanting to have a panel for television of actors, etc. And I can name 3 or other 4 elements. Once you put all this, they build a selection. If you go to La Quinzaine, you have a programmer which has a very specific taste, but he also wants to compete with the official selection. So sometimes he will take a film so that the official selection doesn't have it because he thinks that he can then take attention to him, and sometimes he will take it on his own taste. And his taste is very... I'm producing, I'll tell you, I'm producing a Romanian film right now of a director I find an incredible director. I have shown it to the Cannes selections. One has said, I don't like the film at all. And the other one said, we're considering it for un certain regard. And so it's the same film, it's the same edit, it's the same thing. So you have people which have their own taste, and you have other stakes. On a small Romanian film, it's only a question of taste because there's no other stakes. But for Waltz with Bashir, for example, it was just a question of taste. When they saw the film, they took it in November in the official selection. They said they blocked the film and they said, we want it. No way, no Berlin, no whatever, we want the film. But then there are some moments where you have some other stakes. Last year, we won the Golden Bear with Fuoco a Mare, the Italian film, which went then to the Oscar on Lampedusa. Fuoco a Mare. Fuoco a Mare was Gianfranco Rosi's film. They were convinced, the Italian, I wanted to put it in Cannes, and they were convinced that this year they could go to Berlin. And it's true that this year, Berlin did some work on refugees. And so the film went to competition in Berlin and won the competition. I could never have anticipated it but something was happening in Germany at that time, and the Berlin Film Festival had decided to emphasize this. The film was very strong, and then the jury went even beyond the expectation of the festival. So it's very difficult to answer to this question. Like all of you, I studied veterinarian. I'm a vet. I never did film studies. I studied. I was. Yeah, that's what I did after school. And during these vet studies, I was using the audiovisual material because I was writing, and what I was writing seems very visual. So I started more by directing a bit. And then I decided to enter in this small production company, which was Film DC, when I came back from my military service. At the time, we used to do military service. And I was working, doing everything, but I didn't know anything. I had just done a bit of work by making small films, and Nicolas Philibert was doing one of his first films, and his assistant left, so I became his assistant, and so I learned by doing in this company. And the fact is that we decided to work internationally, and also we had some good directors, which became great directors. I grew with directors. I grew as a producer as directors grew as directors. I started with Nicolas as his assistant on a film that he did for television on a guy climbing, Trilogie pour un homme seul, trilogy for one man, and then I produced Louvre City, which was his first film that went out theatrically, and then produced or co-produced all these films till the last one. I'm not involved in the last one, but till La Maison de la Radio. So he grew as an important director, and me as a producer, publisher, I grew with him and with other directors at the same time. So I have done all my production career in this company, which after 2 years I became a shareholder, and we made the company as it is today, and as it's grown today. But for me, it was learning, by doing. But I teach production, so I think it's important. It's not an example of what anything. The situation was very different when I started this job in France. For example, we were a documentary production company initially, and everything was starting. I mean, when I started this job, there was one documentary per week on French channel. Now there are 2,000 a year on different channels produced, plus the ones that are just bought. So the environment has changed completely, and you're facing another issue, is that your environment is going to change completely. The environment that you're looking at right now is absolutely not the environment in which you will be working. The only thing that is good for you to know is that whatever scenario people make on what is going to happen in production, publishing, and broadcasting, the only growing part, really growing part, whatever scenario, is production. Because whatever happens, people will have to compete for programs. You don't know if traditional channel will disappear, if platforms will take over, if traditional channels will be able to syndicate in platforms. You know, every scenario you can. There's a very good. Very good research work that has been done recently called Future 2025, and they have 4 scenarios in the main countries, and whatever happens. The production part is the production environment in terms of financial growth is growing. It's the only one surely growing, which you can understand. Everybody's competing for programs now. Right, whatever where you're looking at, they have to have programs. That's the problem. Will be for those who cannot bring new programs. Which is sufficiently powerful, because that's why the Netflix model is going so good, because with 117 million people paying every month, they have a financial possibility to produce which is superior to any public channel today. So this is an issue that is very long, and we won't have time here, but I just want to, if we're at this moment, to tell you this, is that being conscious of the environment is also something that enables you to position yourself in this environment and to act on this environment. I mean, what we have become as a producer in France, Film d'ici, has also been made possible by the way the environment of production in France has changed in the last 30 years. We have grown with an environment, not against the other producers, with the other producers in enlarging the environment. This is a very important issue, because wherever the producing is not only a question of money and ideas, it's also a question of what kind of if you're producing for entertainment, or if you're producing for television, if you're producing for public television, private television, etc., you're making a choice. You're making a political choice. And it's something that we have a bit, because the market has become so wide, we have, I think, sometimes forgotten, and even inside the channels themselves, why we are doing this job. And this is a question that I would, if we had time, I would start by addressing each of you to understand why you're doing this job. Because this is the only place where we can start discussing seriously about what we're doing. Because this is the only thing where, when I discuss in a public channel about a program, it's not just about how good is it. It's about what do you want to show. What you have a responsibility. The citizen has given you money to show some programs, to make a television that has a certain number. It has to entertain, but it also has to bring knowledge, and it also has to bring some creation. All these are the missions of public television. You, as a programmer or as somebody deciding to put money, you're only the end of the chain. I mean, you're not it's not just you. It's the mission that the state has given you, and the state has asked the citizen to give him money that he's giving you to do something. And we as a producer are helping you do something, because we are working in this environment, because we want to bring a certain kind of images to people, because we think that there's a difference in making certain kinds of programs or other kind of programs, and that difference is an issue in how we live together in a state, in an environment, in Europe, elsewhere. This is something that always disappears. I'm going to tell you just a conversation that I had 20 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago. I'm discussing Gianfranco Rosi's next film with Arte. They have decided to come in, but we need to sign the contract, and the deadline is today. And they're putting 300,000 euro in the project. And when I receive the contract, I see that by something that financially there's no need to develop, they're taking out of these 300,000 euros 15,000 euros. So I'm starting a discussion to say, why are you taking away these 15,000 euros, and we need them to make the film. What made me completely crazy and mad was that we never discussed about the film and the cost of the film. We only discussed about a guy that wants to show his boss that he's managed to, before even the film starts, to make money on this film, using advances that we have in distribution in sales agent. He's on a public channel. They've decided to show this film. The film has a story. Behind this story, there's a cost, and the cost is never the same from one film to another. We can never discuss about how much it's worth and how much and a contract if we don't know what we're talking about. But most of the discussion that you have, or a lot of discussion you have, because television goes fast, because contracts are made by people which are separate from the content, you never have the discussion in the right direction. And this is this is something that I think, when I'm talking to you about knowing why you're doing things, it's also bringing all the people with whom you work with to really know why they are working in producing or directing or filming or editing or broadcasting or financing these images. Because if we don't discuss about this, then we're just talking about virtual things. And that virtual thing, I've had a virtual conversation. I've had a guy who's not telling me, is not asking me why the film is costing this, what we're going to do, why is it taking 2 years to do this film, what kind of risk we're taking, etc. He's just telling me, my boss has to sign before 6 o'clock tonight, and if you don't accept this, then the contract is off. And he hasn't even got the right to tell me this, but I don't have the time to discuss it with him. And the film has no importance at this moment. We have never talked about that. And so it's just to explain to you that we are in a job where a lot of time we lose track of why we're doing things. And if we lose track of why we're doing things, then everything has no sense. Everything I can tell you has no sense. And we come back to why initially we wanted to do this film. And sometimes difficulties take you off track. I'm taking you another example. Yesterday I was showing a film that I'm trying to do on a newspaper in France that we've done. We've edited. The director has not been paid. The editor has hardly not been paid because nobody wants to do this film. And the film is really great, but when nobody wants to do this film and you've tried a lot of things, because you have a company, because you have to make things running, etc., sometimes you don't do exactly all the efforts that you could do to make this film happen. And yesterday I was re-seeing the film with the journalists that are filmed in the film, and I realized how important this film was, and I just came out of this screening saying, yes, for the moment, I haven't done my job yet. Even though I know there's no money for the film, nobody wants to do it, etc., I haven't done all I need to do when I chose this film and when I decided to do it to make it happen. It doesn't mean that I will make it happen, but I will find it, but it means that for the moment, I had lost track of why I had decided initially to do this film. And this is part of the production work. This is part of what makes you just somebody doing business or somebody which is really knows why he's doing what he is. But he needs to, so to come back to your initial question, if somebody that knows why he's doing his work meets somebody that doesn't know why he's doing his work of directing, that becomes a big problem. In the question you were asking, were the main problems that I encountered in the creation process. Dropping off a project is possible in the initial stages. Once you've started spending money, it's very hard to come back for a lot of reasons. So this is why there's a moment where you're in the, it doesn't mean that you have to use this position, but in the initial position, you're in power. You have the power of deciding to launch a project or not launch a project. Even sometimes you don't find the money, and that's decided by somebody, by other people than you. But if you find the money, you still have the power of not launching a project if you don't believe, if you quit believing in it. That has never happened to me. Once the project is launched, then the power comes to the director. So if you haven't created a relationship of trust, which implies not only one film, but because when you produce like we do, I work on about, I don't know, from very early stages to film that are finishing now, I work at the same moment on 100 projects at a time. They are, of course, I'm not doing it alone. I'm doing it because there's a company, because there are other producers I work with, so there are very different situations. But but I have the responsibility. If the company falls, that means that because one film made the company fall, that means there's 99 projects or films that will not be done because of one film. So this responsibility I have in mind all the time when I discuss with the director. Even there are films that I find fantastic that I haven't done because I know that this director wouldn't care a damn about the other films in the company. He wouldn't care a damn about the tool. So yes, there are some films where I've even found some money and found enough money to do the film, but where I've transmitted the film to another producer because I knew that the way the director was considering the production work was putting all the other films in danger. But there's one moment, so if I had decided to do this film, there's one moment where you spend too much and you cannot move back because it's worse both ways. And that's where if you haven't really created the right relationship with the director, you're in trouble. You're in trouble because if I have met some directors which are ready to, which consider even as a value to go whatever it needs to do their film, whatever consequences there is. Very romantic value. And I know some producers which consider that if they do that, it's also very romantic. I have a very pragmatic view, which is that I have a responsibility, which is if I want to work that way, I can only work on one film at a time. Then I don't care if the company falls. I create another company afterwards, etc. But if I work on so many films, then I have to change this relation to all of the directors. Makes you less romantic as a producer. Less this idea of gambling in production, which is, I think, a very, very old idea, which continues to live in the imaginary of what a producer is for me is a lack of respect for the decisions that you take when you decide to take other films. It's a strange company because well, strange. It's moving actually, and it's the interesting. We are 8 producers, which are now younger. There are different generations. We're now in a change of generation in the production company. So there are producers that are now 30, 35, 40 years old, and but they're all shareholders now of the company, and we're trying to make them become identical shareholders to us. Even that needs the production. It needs that they produce enough to do that. After that, we have staff for financial staff. So one of the associates is the financial director, and he has 2 people working with him. We have a person which is only dedicated to the life of the program, communication, festivals, every demand that we have, because when you produce, I'm sorry, I will answer, but stop on some elements that are important for me. When you produce, you not only have the responsibility of doing the film, but you have also the responsibility of making it accessible. It's even written in the contracts. Some directors in some other companies have taken their rights back because the film was not available. So even though you have a responsibility of making it available in a way or another, this, when you start producing for 30 years, sometimes 20 to 25 films a year or 30 films a year, you start having a catalog of 900 films, etc., and you have to make them accessible. So, but that is not very productive because the kind of film that we produced, a few make money, but most of them do not make much money, but we still have to make them accessible. So that is staff which is in a certain way unproductive, which doesn't pay for what they cost. But it's part of your responsibility. And so there's one person which is dealing with this, and for example, we're trying to make all the film accessible. Now they're all accessible on at least on Vimeo, even those who are not not distributed, have no sales agent, have no publishing. That you still have access to them, because if you go on our website, you can through Vimeo you can have access to the films, and that has a cost. So one person dealing with that, one person dealing. We've decided to have some editing tables and some material in-house, not because we think it's a good idea. It's a very bad idea financially, because you have to renew everything, because you have to have somebody taking care of, but because we wanted to have some of the directors we work with, editing in-house, so that there is contact between people that do not work directly on the project and the project itself, so that there's a kind of they're not completely cut from the making of the films, and at least some of them are made inside the company. Then I have an assistant, because we don't produce as all. We don't. The number of production that each producer does is very different. We have. So yeah, that's about it. And then on each project, of course, there's a team built with a production manager, etc., dealing with 1, 2, or 3 films. Some companies have chosen to have only one production manager for all the productions, divided in shooting, post-production, etc. Financially, it's much more viable, but it means that you standardize the way that you do films. And we've discussed about it in-house and decided not to make this choice, because even if it would make us more financially better, it would make that you would do any of the films that I've shown to you with the same person in terms of post-production, but it's not done absolutely the same way. We try to invent. Each film is a prototype, but it's a prototype also because the way of making it is a prototype. And so even if, of course, you have to do budget, of course, you have to do editing, of course, etc. But the way you're doing it, the people you're doing it, the sensibility you're doing it, and I've had production managers which some directors found incredible, and some others wouldn't even talk to them. So if you have them in-house, you have a problem. And so we've separated what is needed to make a company work to what is needed to make films work. Films work like architecture. I mean, if you look at the financial, the plan of a company where you have numbers for films, etc., it's like an architect. He has each project is separate, and each project has a separate team, etc. And then you have to have people working on to make these. And it's the same comptabilité. I don't know how you say comptabilité in English. I forgot. But well. Accounting, yeah. The accounting system is the same. Is the same, and it means also that you structure your company according to the way you see production, the way you see making films, and so this is why there are very, very different models of production, and the tool that you build is at the image of the people that are making, are producing. We have a company which is now very different than it was when it started, and needs to be able to adapt, because it's not doing one kind of production. We would be doing fiction series for television. We would have another form of organization. Here, it enables us to change scale all the time, and to be able to change scale, and to be able to do some very small films which have no. I mean, the film Silvered Water, which went to Cannes. Silvered Water was done with a late night slot on Arte, which is called La Lucarne, which puts 45,000 euro in 50 in production. So the film is made for about, I don't know, 100,000 euro, maybe a bit, not more. Michael Colas is done for 5 million euro. They're done in the same company with the same. It's not like we made a company for big films and a company for small films, etc. They're made with the same people in a certain sense, except that we look then for specific talents, because to run a budget of 5 million is not the same thing than running a budget of 100,000 euro. It's not the same people. It's not the same kind of work. So this is also something which this idea of how you build a tool is is really important because it's an ongoing process. Like everything that I'm telling you, it's not like there's a kind of truth and then once you've built it, it doesn't move. We are still looking for the equilibrium of a company like that. A company like Film d'ici in Paris, I have two companies which are linked. I'm part of a company in Paris which has which costs every year €1 million, which means the films that we do have to cover €1 million. This is salaries, the place where we have telephone, the fixed sum is that. So that means that in the ratio of what goes to the film and what goes to cover the costs, we have to be between 8 to 10 million euros of production. And we have to do them, because if we don't do them, we start losing money. So this gives you a certain... that it doesn't mean that we have... we produce to cover the costs. We've managed to find an equilibrium till now, and that we're not making money, but we're not losing money. It's every year, or sometimes we have we cover with very different things, but we cover. In Montpellier, where I live, I created another company, which is the Film d'ici is a part of the shareholder, but with other shareholders, which is called Film d'ici Méditerranée, which is a very small company specialized in the Mediterranean area and the regional production. That has only one person, and if I do 2 films a year, the company works perfectly. I think the overall cost is €24,000. So €1 million, €24,000. So I know the difference in terms of pressure, kind of production, but then with the €1 million company of costs, when I do Michael Colas, I discover the first day of shooting that for a lot of reasons, which we can develop, but the difference between the cost that the production manager had announced me before launching the film and the real cost of what the film's going to be, there's a difference of €1.3 million. That means I'm starting the film at minus €1.3 million. And the shooting has started, so I call the director and say, okay, you stay on the set and do the film. I don't know how long you're going to be able to do the film. I'm going to start looking for money. With the company in Montpellier, I closed the company and the film is stopped. With the company in Paris, there's the financial structure is sufficient to give me time to find this money and to be able to hold this film even in this situation. Finally, I found the money, and the film was, we made the film for 5 million instead of 3.7, which was the initial budget. But this day, I understood why I needed this kind of company to do this kind of film, because I also want to do this kind of film, and not only small films. And if I can't do them with a company with 1 employee which doesn't make enough to have banking support, to have cash flow big enough, etc., to support a problem. And this is all the things that I'm triggering with you can be developed much longer. For example, the question of cash flow in a company, how it affects production, how it affects the way people work, etc., is a real issue. But we won't have time to enter in all these issues. I just want to raise the interests on all the different issues: artistic, financial, company, overall collective action, environment, because I think these are the things which, if you want to think about what producer in what environment, these are the questions that come back all the time. There's one thing which cannot be taught, which is also an issue in your question. You can learn about how you build a net of relation which permits you to produce. You can work on your environment. You can work on the company and how cash flow works, etc. You can work on a lot of things. There's one moment where you're facing a film, an edit, and you're telling what you think of this edit. And the director is going to listen to you or not listen to you. And the editor is going to listen to you or not listen to you because what you're saying is triggering something or not. That part of the production belongs to you and cannot be taught. What can be taught is looking at films, is culture, general culture, is having seen other films, is knowing how films are made, etc. But that moment, the first or the second time that I was in an editing room and I talked to a director, and I was a young producer with no experience and no schools, etc. That's where that's where what you say has an impact on the work of the director, and he listens to you, and then you work with him again or her again, or you get out of the editing room and you have people discussing on saying how stupid what you said was and has no interest and they're not going to listen to you. Some producers I know, because they're very good financial producers, which means they know how to find money, have maintained a position in production even though what they produce is bullshit. Because they have this financial power where they can make something happen even though artistically it's not very interesting. They generally go towards more market productions. And some producer, I have a partner which is a great artistic producer. He's really great. I make him read all my projects now, and he tells me what he thinks. And he's very good at working on edits, but he's absolutely he doesn't know how to find €1. And between that, you have all the grading of. So to answer to your question is only knowing more where you are. I really think that I can look at a project. I now, with the 30 years experience, I know that I can act on the editing and make projects better by the dialogue that I have. So this I know. I used to spend a lot of time finding new ways of finding money. Now a bit less because I'm sick of moving all the time. And so, but I've built a system where I work with younger producers that they move more than I do. And so I'm more relying on my experience than really continuing to look for new markets and look for new... But there are in the company, there are very different producers. There's one there's a young guy, 30 years old. He's... I hired him in the company in the first place because I met him in a film school, and at the end of the session, I received a lot of mails saying, "Could you please, would you be so kind and maybe have the, if you're nice, and could you sign the letter of support to us?" And there was one out of all which wrote, "You will find enclosed the letter that I would like you to sign as soon as possible." I said, "Okay, there's a producer." And he's the producer. And he came in the company, he was 26 years old, 30 years old. He's just finishing the production of an animation film, €5 million. I am not sure that he has the best taste of all. Well, this film is great. But I mean, in the sense that I'm not sure artistically that he's the best of all of us. But I'm sure of one thing, that when he wants something to happen, you're going to have some trouble not making it happen. Because he will pass through doors, windows, any holes that there is to find money where it is to make this film happen when he wants to do it. So the thing, and he understood that he needed a tool like Les Films d'Ici to grow faster than if he had created his own company and etc. And for me, he's one of the future of the company. I mean, and he will produce things that are very different from what we did before. I think he's coming from other background. He's not at all. We came from a very political background. Even my elders, because they were older than me before I came from 68 and the extreme left. I was not from there, but I was politically involved, so we built something from there. The generation that came afterwards was not as politically involved that we are, and they go in different directions, but we find each other in let's say the level of films that we're looking for. I mean, the fact that most of us are interested in new forms, in new ways of telling stories, in new, not just making programs for channels. And so to answer to your question, I'm more trying to give you different hints on how artistically, financially, as an entrepreneur, etc. And then everybody has to find who or she or he is in there. This is why I always try to not advise to create a company if you don't know on what value you're creating it. It can be anything. It can be external value, working with a very strong director that you've created a relation with and that you can grow with. It can be a subject because you're the only one who can do the definitive film on the head of Daesh, or it can be whatever. But it can't just be I want to have a company. Because the environment is very competitive. And so knowing who you are and where your value is, and if your value is to discover talent, you better start discovering it before creating your company, because it's a lot of people, even if they have talent, spend too much time trying to run a company instead of doing their production job. First of all, I will start by the problem that I have with new projects. If I work as a publisher, producer, and I create relations with the directors I work with, after 30 years, and I want to meet new directors, after 30 years, each year, before I even start the year, I already have a number of projects from all the directors I'm working with. So I'm waiting for the next Mograbi, Gianfranco Rosi is starting his film, Wang Bing is finishing his film, Korsakowski is doing his film, So there's already, because we've been doing films for 5, 6, 10, 15 years, there's already a slate which is moving. But because I don't want to, this is why the company has grown, because I didn't want just to do these directors, and I wanted to meet new directors. So that makes the company expand. This is why I didn't want to have a company with €1 million each month, each year to finance. But if I want to do everything that I want to do, it has to grow. Then projects, normally projects coming from abroad now come with a producer. The company, in the sense that I create a relation with producers in Italy, Spain, Germany, and they bring me their talents. What you have to know is that a producer, as a French producer, if I work with a foreign talent, it has to be something that we don't have in France. A way of looking at the world, a kind of production, because if it's a project which just has a nice subject and good filmmaking, we are doing 2,000 a year. So when I go to a channel saying I have an Italian film, for example, I'm not going to say I have an Italian film. I'm going to say, I think this year I identify this project as something that is unseen in what is being proposed to you Arte channel, for example. So if you're looking for it, having a look on Italian creation, you should look at this project. So it has to be at a certain level. Because there is at least small space for foreign production, more in France than in other countries, but small space. So the, for example, for the Romanian project came from a very good producer I've been knowing for 15 years in Romania. Not to name her Ada Salomon, which is she's a great producer. And she proposed to me this director and this script. And so not only it was a good script, not only it was a good director, but I knew that the producer that was financing majority of the film, because it came, was also a very good producer. So, and we would have a very good and easy collaboration. So it's, the other day I had an Italian project coming from a woman fiction project, and the script was good, but she was being produced in Italy by young producers, which are certainly very nice, but the financial elements were nonsense. I mean, they had no experience of what it was to co-produce, and so it made everything very, very complicated from the beginning. So I said, if you want to co-produce, you better start keeping your producers, not to tell you, but to find another producer in your country which knows what international production is, because it's not going to work. It's absolutely not going to work like that. It's too far from reality. It's of reality of what we can build, because production is also this. We haven't talked about this, but international production is putting together a whole kind of obligations, national obligations, that we have to fit together. And if we don't know them, that's also one thing. Then you can't work. For us, it's pretty hard to work with Catalonia because we need Catalonian content, because we need a certain number of expenses, because we need. Okay, so if we want to do it, we better work with a Catalonian producer which knows exactly how to deal with this, and which will tell us it's possible if you give us this, and if you give us that, and if you work that way. Or which will come to me saying, look, there's one director, I know your system, there's one director, or there's one subject, like I'm doing with another Catalonian producer here, which came to me with a film on North Africans that had fought the war, not on the Franco side, but on the Republican side. And everybody knows North Africa from being on the Franco side. And there were all the Algerians, Tunisian, Moroccans that had fought it with the Republicans. It was something which I thought was interesting to read. The 2019 is going to be the anniversary of the Retirada, and it will be also an event in France, because 450,000 people came to France at that moment, in the south of France where I live. So nationally I knew there was no market for this film, but regionally I thought there might be something to be done. But he knew what I needed as an obligation to be able to produce it in France. And I knew what he needed. And so this might work. This might work. So it's not just about receiving projects, because we receive a number all the time. And we read them all. But I have to tell the truth. The projects that of people that I don't know that I do are mostly come from other directors that I know, or from producers that I know. They rarely come from the post like that, and I don't remember one just coming like that and raising enough attention. I've tried to make a panorama of what the issues are for me of a producer, but of course, as we've seen, we've done a bit for development, but as we've done a bit for companies, everything needs to be approfondi, needs to go deeper. One thing that we have talked not much about, but which is very central to the work of the producer or the financial producer, is building network. Building a network is something that is essential to your capability of responding to different kinds of situations. If you, there's a lot of producers that work only on one market, and they are very vulnerable, because if you produce for, I don't know, Arte, for example, and only with Arte, in France you would have Arte, state money, and a bit of regional money, and that would make your financial plan. And so you continue, and you produce for Arte, and you're very vulnerable, because if they stop taking films from you, then you have not explored other situations. So the idea of creating a network nationally and internationally on different on different markets permits you also to respond to any situation that you can have, but it also means that you might want to produce only whatever. Every time I say I'm a vet, people say, so you do animal films. I don't do animal films, but I could have done. I could have been a specialist of animal filmmaking. Then my network is only specialized in animal filmmaking in the world, and I can then maybe find a lot of money doing that. But if I specialize in nothing, I have to have a very wide network. That means investing time, and because every time we have a refusal in the company, people say, oh, there's a refusal. And I say, look, if we look seriously at a ratio, I think we have to ask 100 people to have 99 no's and 1 yes. So it's our work also to explore and explore and explore and explore and continue moving and continuing to widen that network. So networking is for a producer that is also a financial producer, not just an artistic producer, a key issue of building the environment to permit you to do what you want, and is related to what you really want to do, which is the initial question that a producer has to ask himself: is what does he really want to do? I think we have to stop with the verticality that we have not only in production, but we have in the world in general, which is the producer, head of the company, the director, head of the artistic, etc. I think we are in a world where these things are really, really changing, and that when I moved to Montpellier 8 years ago, people said, what are you doing? Production is going to fall. I was doing most of the productions in the company at that time. And it took a lot of time for people to understand that it would change completely the way of working, but that it would permit it to be more collaborative, more horizontal, with more responsibilities taken by different people. That it's not just relating to the big producer which knows everything about everything, because it's not true. And it's true for the director also. I think now we have directors working in a region, and then other people continuing to work in other regions and editing another part of the planet, etc. And they all have a responsibility, and they all work together. And of course, there's one thing that is not democratic, which is taste. But the rest is democratic and can be shared in terms of responsibility. And the way and the kind of films that we'll do and the way of producing films we'll do will pass through a change of structure and mentality and way of considering the way we work. It's only a very beginning of what's happening. But I think there's a political issue behind that. If we think that politically we don't want dictators anymore, I think we should start in our work to start thinking that it's not going to go better because we have dictators in key positions. Thank you.